Welcome everyone, Christine here with a discussion about Nurgle in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. Nurgle, out of the 3 races of Thrones of Decay, I think it's the weakest and least interesting race. That is not to say that Nurgle hasn't been vastly improved compared to where they were before Thrones of Decay, but to be quite blunt about it, I think Creative Assembly was obviously more focused on making the Empire Dwarves work, and look, to their credit, they did an amazing job with it. Nurgle was just a lower priority. I said it long before Thrones of Decay came out that what would decide the success or failure of that DLC was what they were going to do with the Empire and Dwarves. I was right. It was very successful because they put in a lot of effort to make the Empire and Dwarves work. Now, they did improve Nurgle quite substantially. The economy, the plagues, etc. But here's the problem in Nurgle campaigns, and for the record, this is not to say like Tamarkon is a bad legendary lord. Tamarkon is an amazing legendary lord for a mediocre race, I would dare say. And the reason Nurgle is mediocre comes down to the infection dilemma. See, in Nurgle campaigns, in order to recruit units, you can't just build a barracks and recruit units normally. No, you have to go through this entire cycle of buildings. That's not necessarily an issue. In fact, it can be fun, because it does enforce a certain amount of unit variety on you, which is good. Of course, the problem is that each of these buildings is ridiculously expensive in terms of getting them, and then rushing through the cycle. So if we look at the basic barracks, it's 200 infections. And then, yes, you can speed it up, but it does end up taking a decent amount of time. So you're looking at a race where the basic military structure takes 4 turns to recruit. That gives you a couple of units. But obviously a couple of units is not a freaking army. So you end up in a situation where it takes turn after turn after turn where you're not doing anything, where you can't really do much of anything except recruit a handful of units and really low quality units, while you build up a very powerful army. The army that you build, an army like this, sure, it's not the best in the world, but it is capable of defeating most foes. Of course, in Epidemius campaign, Malice Darkblade can be annoying, but I'll get into why that's not really a relevant issue whatsoever. What do I think is the problem here? Well, 2 things. One, the building takes too long to build. A basic barracks at tier 1 should not take more than 2 turns to build. The fact that it's taking 4 turns per each building means that Nurgle campaigns are inherently slower. This wouldn't be so much of an issue if the meta of the Warhammer 3 campaigns wasn't very focused on the early game. Like, look at this campaign. This campaign was over very quickly. It's done. Sure, the victory conditions might require me to deal with Malice Darkblade, but do I care? No. And that's kind of the point about all of this. What is the reason for you to care about victory conditions when your campaign is over very quickly? And regardless the race you're playing, you know it's going to be slower paced, so the campaign is going to be over at by the time you would actually complete those victory conditions, it would just be like Grindfest Central anyway. And you could also just show up and obliterate one faction. I feel like you should be able to vassalize some of these factions. That would make it interesting, because you have a choice in an Epidemius campaign. You can either eliminate Balanced Darkblade very quickly, or you can just vassalize him or ally him. I didn't vassalize him. And of course, that is a discussion. Actually, yeah, so if we look over here, we have a defensive alliance, we don't have a military alliance. But the problem here goes beyond just like the requirements of getting a structure like this in the first place and increasing your unit diversity. The problem is that the way diplomacy works in Warhammer 3 is that you're not really going to get a lot from region trading, which you want to do kind of in every campaign, but you're not going to get a lot from region trading if you're selling just regular economic structures to a faction. You can get something, but what you really want to do in order to get the outcomes you want in diplomacy, and this is important given the pacing of the campaign, you want to sell barracks. So that creates a further problem for Nurgle, where either your diplomacy is incredibly limited because you're just giving settlements for nothing, for not much value at all, or you are giving settlements with value, but you're sacrificing those barracks that cost 200 infections each. But that is not all either. Because you don't just use infections for the sake of military buildings. If you did, that would be one thing, and it would be better. But no, CA went all in on this one with the infections for 3 different things, and that does hurt you. Though it should be said with regards to unit recruitment, you do end up in this kind of ridiculous situation where it's like you just kind of don't recruit an army until you get the full stack of units there. And also with heroes, you can recruit every hero at tier 2. Here I deliberately didn't do it, but I could have earlier. But you kind of just end up being able to recruit 3-4 heroes once you get enough buildings to tier 2. That's kind of a ridiculous situation, I'm not gonna lie, because you end up where like, oh, you don't have a dynamic like other races where you recruit one thing at a time. That's kind of okay, actually. I do dislike how long some unit recruitment can take, but here you're just doing very little for a very long time and then just bam, doomstack. That's the problem with Nurgle. There's no middle ground. There's no like, oh, I'll get a couple of units, a couple of heroes. No, you're just like 4 heroes at once, entire stack at once, because everything else is far less efficient. Why would you just recruit a couple of units? Just what, you want to screw yourself over in supply line? The way you gain infections is either through Bal or through the toxic spores building, which give you very, very little. In Bal, you don't have a situation where it's like you automatically gain them. So let me just switch Epidemius over here and give him the movement command, the console command, to just showcase this. So in Bal, when you fight over settlements, and you're going to fight over settlements a lot more than field Bals, but when you take a settlement over here, right, just to give you an example, you have no inherent benefit of infections. I think Nurgle should have a benefit, like Castors have laborers in every Bal, Dark Elves have laborers in every Bal, Khorne has skulls in every Bal. Just saying, if infections aren't just a case of like, oh, you only have one way of gaining infections from Bal, and that way is to fight a field Bal. So let's just say we tell, oh, I guess we pissed off Sigvald sufficiently that he's kind of angry with us. But we move over here, and this is kind of the problem. So you can't gain it for settlements, regardless. You can only get from armies, but only if you go over here, fight an army, and choose a specific post-Bal option. This is kind of similar to how the High Elves gain influence, except High Elves have much better ways of gaining influence and don't use it for anywhere as much. Because you're not just, because it's like, imagine if High Elves had to spend influence, or Dwarves had to spend Oath Gold for their basic military recruitment. That is the nonsense that is on display here. But it goes further. Because Nurgle does another thing with all these infections. It gets research. There's a couple of research things that do require a pretty substantial amount of infections. Either 400, 600, 200. This one is 200, I believe. This one is 400. And these are powerful. Well, they're not necessarily powerful technologies themselves, though Fattening Seeds is certainly a very powerful technology. But it gives you various benefits. Nurgle does end up being powerful, but you end up in a situation where the early game is pretty slow and annoying, and then the late game is a complete cakewalk. That is not a good campaign balance. It's a similar issue to the Tomb Kings, who have a horrible, grindy, slow early game, and then once they get going, there's no stopping them. That is not good campaign design with good balance. But even further, and this is specifically what ruins Epidemius' campaign, plagues. Epidemius in particular is focused on getting as many of these plagues as possible to, you know, get various buffs. The reason this doesn't work is that plagues also use these same infections, those infections that are incredibly limited. You kind of understand, like, it's research, it's plagues, it's a limitation on getting those infections because you don't get them naturally for battle. I think Nurgle would be a much better race if they could, if basic military buildings could be constructed first off for cash. The cycle should cost an infection, sure, but it should cost cash. You might cycle like if they just completely removed infections from buildings, from the building cost, and instead asked us for cash. Because Nurgle actually has a decent economy right now in terms of cash. You just never build it because you don't need it. Because what are you going to do with cash? Like, just save off mountains to be like a goblin? Like, you can get a good amount of money. That's not the problem over here for Nurgle. The problem is you're using infections for everything. And this brings me to a point. Festus, who is weirdly just sitting AFK over here for whatever reason. Don't ask me why that is. I have no freaking idea. He just seems to have just been stuck. And he's leveled, clearly, but I don't know. Am I been playing the... No, this is legendary hard. That's weird. Sometimes the AI just breaks. But, or I guess he lost and now he's recuperated. Regardless, Festus, you want a good Nurgle campaign where you're actually using plagues and get all these wonderful units, but still have limitations on unit recruitment? Festus is a much better choice. You don't have necessarily the exact same toolbox, but you have the same plague system as Nurgle. You get more infections than Nurgle because you still gain them from Bow. You may not gain them from buildings, but you don't have to spend them for research. You don't have to spend them for structures. So ultimately, you actually end up being better for it. Like, it is certainly an issue of the campaign pacing. The final point I wish to address is climate. Nurgle has a decent selection of climate, a very good selection of climate, but it lacks one thing that's very important: mountain. Why is mountain important? Well, it wouldn't be important if not for the fact that every single Nurgle campaign in the game, be it Festus, Tamarkan, and Kugaf, all have mountain climate near them. Now, over here I have a climate change mod. I'm not really fond of it necessarily, because it's just like, it's just saying the map is so crap that I'm using it. But look at Kugaf's campaign. He has mountains galore. Going into the Darklands is without mountain climate not being good is a problem. Or let alone the mountains more. Going into these locations where we were specifically a race that suffers far more than others because of that climate situation is a nightmare. And that is the inherent issue that Nurgle has. And that's the reason I don't like them. Like, I love Tamarkan as a legendary lord. I couldn't care less about Epidemius, but I love Tamarkan. He should be a really fun and dynamic and interesting campaign, but because of those victory conditions, climate situation, like, he has to defeat Grimgor to win his campaign. I was like, why the hell would I choose a fight with Grimgor when I can vassalize him? That's the thing. That's the annoying aspect. Like, the victory conditions were not especially well designed in these Nurgle campaigns. So I think, like, it's some tweaking, some balancing, some readjustment. It's like, if CA were to readjust these things, and that's kind of my issue here, it's not like I'm asking for sweeping changes. I'm just literally talking about things mods could do easily. Reduce the infection cost or remove it completely from military buildings. Keep the cycle if you want. 2 turns at most for each tier. Maybe impose more severe tier restrictions on that so that we don't just spam Chosen and Warriors of Caste quickly. Though, mind you, you always gotta remember how quickly Khorne can get Chosen in Warriors of Caste. So, yes, I know people want to say Nurgle is slow and all that. I think making a campaign slower on the campaign map just makes it worse. Just a simple reality. I think that entire design philosophy, like, oh, this race is slow but powerful in the race. Yeah, slow means weak. Tamarkan might be a doomstack on his own, to be sure, but that doesn't mean the race as a whole is great. I don't dislike Nurgle, I'm just irritated more so than anything by the issues it has, because I would like to enjoy these campaigns. But yeah, Tamarkan's campaign kind of feels like a nothing campaign, and it shouldn't be. Like, there's a lot of great mechanics with the chieftains, a lot of little interesting bits, but... And I've played them multiple times, but the moment I deal with Grimgor one way or another and deal with Zarangron, GG, well played, that's it. Over. Everything else is a pointless grind. That is an inherent issue in the game, but some campaigns do work better than that. Malachi works better than that. Karl Franz works better than that. Freaking Quick works better than that. And don't get me started on how well Khorne works. I mean, it is telling, I think, that... Look, I understand why some of the design philosophies that they had for Ogres, Greenskins, and Khorne... And yes, Greenskins do work pretty well as a race. Gorbad's campaign mechanics are whatever, but when I look at the racial redesigns, I do see an improvement even compared to what they did with Thrones of Decay. But even within the context of Thrones of Decay, Nurgle ended up being last. Like, I think there's an attachment to this that... I think CA may have an attachment to the idea like, oh, we want a lot of diversity. This is probably in response to a lot of the criticism they got back in Warhammer 1 over the lack of the diversity, shared starting positions and all that, but they've gone too far on the other end, and I think Warhammer 3 has suffered a lot for it. They did make the Ogres and Khorne work in a very unique way, very differently, and they work exceptionally well. Greenskins also work well while having an identity. Having an identity as a race can work, but it needs to be balanced properly given the context, the overall context of the campaign map. The problem of Omens of Destruction, well, let's just say this. Thrones of Decay has great legendary lords, but not necessarily the best race for Nurgle. Omens of Destruction has great race redesign overall, and yes, that includes the Greenskins, because you can't tell me that the Mangler Squigs, the Hero Recruitment, I mean, Shamans are an issue. But overall, like, great job there, but the legendary lords, except Arbol, are... Well, Goldfag is pretty fun, not gonna lie, but... Except Arbol and Goldfag, not especially great. Quasine signing out, stay tuned for more, and let me know what you guys think about all of this.